Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here and welcome to this webinar on how to build a brand community. As a quick intro, my name is Quentin, and I am one of the three co-founders of TokyWoky and mainly in charge of the product. What I mean by that is that what I really focus on today is finding the fit between the product at TokyWoky, which is, we'll cover it, but it's a community platform, and the market, and what the market needs in terms of community building. And so what that means is I actually spend a lot of time either talking to brands who actually are looking for to build their community, or to brands who actually are working with us on creating their community. And the goal of this webinar, so this is a yearly webinar, and the goal of it is really to recap everything that we've learned, everything that I've learned about building communities in the last 12 months. And the idea is to turn it into actionable insight for project owners. So quick intro also on what TokyWoky is to give you the context needed for the rest of the presentation. So at TokyWoky, we're a French startup originally, and our main vision is that most brands have what we call key customers or ambassadors. These are the guys that are writing the reviews on website. These are the ones that are interacting with the brand on social networks, tagging them. They're also the guys that are buying the most products. And what we found at TokyWoky is that oftentimes these key customers are going to be spread out on socials, on the CRM, on the website. And what we've understood is that if you manage as a brand to gather these key customers in one place and to incentivize and motivate them there, you can actually dramatically increase the impact that they have on business. So to kind of like carry out that vision, what we do is that we help brands build their customer communities and customer community platforms, and we then guide them on how to best leverage the asset that is their community. So quick agenda on our side. We're basically going to cover three key points, I think, today. The first one will be why brands are building a customer community. Second one would be how they're going about building that community. And the third one will be what's actually the best way to launch that community internally. Once we've covered those three parts, there'll be a Q&A session where you'll get all the time you need to ask questions. But as you've probably understood by now, this is one of those webinars where we don't have consultants, we don't have guests, we really just have me. And what that means is it's going to be me talking for 30 minutes. So please, if you have any questions or you feel like interacting in any way, don't hesitate to use the chat. I see some people have already started doing so. Hi, guys. So anyways, if you have any question, you can ask them on the chat. I think on mobile, you can open it with the top button on the right. On desktop, you should see it there. And I'll try and pick up those questions as soon as I see them, or leave them for the end if I see it's kind of like a big question that will need more time. One last quick thing. If some of you are struggling to hear me or are getting some kind of bad connection, try using Chrome as your browser. It usually works best like that. And if you have to give up because of some kind of like low internet connection, please know that we'll send you the video after. So worst case scenario, you'll be able to see it, but not live. That's it. All right. So now that tech part is done. And by the way, yeah, if you feel like you want to test the chat, don't hesitate to put a message, say hi here, so that you can check that everything works fine on your side. All right. So let's dive into the webinar itself. And first question that we're going to look at is why. And why brands are looking to build customer communities today. So one of the first things we do whenever we meet a new brand on a call is we ask them why they have a community project, what they're trying to do with their community. And what I've done for this part is I've simply started to highlight and explain the top 3 reasons that brands actually mention to us when they explain to us why they're creating a community. So if I start with the first reason that we often hear, that first reason is access, and access to key customers. Now, the problem brands are trying to solve here is, how do I get continuous access to my top customers? And today they really have 2 ways to do that. The first one is socials. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And the problem about communicating with your top customers in socials is that you only end up reaching 1 to 10% of them. because your organic reach is limited. And as we're seeing year after year, that organic reach is constantly diminishing. So if you actually want to talk to 100% of your customers on socials, you actually have to pay. Most brands don't see that as a solid or a consistent way to reach their customers, so it's not really a viable option. Second option is emails, and actually sending emails to your top customers. Now, the problem with that is we're seeing a bunch of customers whose databases are shrinking due to GDPR, but also email in itself and as a media is actually quite limited. All you can do is push content, but not really interact with your customers. So that's why we're seeing more and more brands starting to gather their top customers in a community that they actually own, where they get that direct access to these customers. One of the best, I think, and earliest example of that is what Glossier had been doing. So Glossier is, for those of you who don't know, today it's a billion-dollar beauty company, but they actually started out as a blog. And the interesting thing is that as they grew, their blog actually became their customer community. And they used it to co-create the vast majority of their products, getting constant and nonstop insights from their customers. It basically, as their founder, Emily Weiss, says, it basically allowed them to have continuous access to their customers to grow the brand and grow it to what it is today. So that's for access. The second key reasons we're hearing from customers is driving loyalty. So most of the brands we actually talk to have what we call a pyramidal structure. What that means is that somewhere around 5% of their top customers will represent 20 to 40% of their revenue. And with the arrival of D2C brands and increased competition, one key challenge that they have is to create a customer experience that's basically better at retaining these guys. I had a recent discussion with an exec from a leading cosmetics group, and I like the way he put it. He basically said, we know that improving our most loyal customer experience is the key to our growth today. But at the same time, what I'm seeing is the main tool that we're using to do that today is still the same newsletter that we were using 15 years ago. And the way I see it, the main reason that he wanted to start creating their customer community was really to start having something a bit more interactive, a bit more engaging in terms of experience than sending emails. And the one thing we've been seeing on all of our platforms, and I'm guessing our competitors must see the same kind of metrics, is that when you do manage to get users talking to each other and talking to the brand and participating, interacting with the products on a community platform, across all our platforms, we're seeing retention rates that are multiplied by 5. Third reason is that we see brands creating customer communities is creating content. Now, one of the key trends that most of you will have noticed in the last decade is the rise of UGC. So user-generated content, whether it's reviews, pictures, videos. And the latest metrics we get on that are actually confirm this trend, which is that today only 4% of customers actually say they trust brands and influencer messages, while 85% of them actually say they trust UGC over brand content. So what's happening is a strategic objective of brands today is to find a way to control and drive when and how their customers are creating that UGC, which is becoming capital to their marketing strategy. And one way that brands have found to do that is to gather their customer community on dedicated platforms where they actually animate and reward those users, those content creators, for creating that content. Two good examples that we have would be Superdrug. So Superdrug in the UK actually leverages its platform to get their best customers to test and review products. So writing reviews, but also creating pictures, content, routines. Another example would be a brand like Monkey, a fashion brand who organizes model competition amongst its customers, and through these model competitions creates a lot of like real authentic customer content that they can leverage on socials or their brand website. These would be typical examples of how with a customer community, you can scale that user content creation. Now, to give you a quick recap of this part, so 3 main reasons why users are building their brand communities. First one is to gain direct access to their best customers. Second one is to retain top customers through a differentiating experience. And the last one is really to turn their customers into content creators and advocates. The last thing I'd like to note, the last question I'd like to note before we get to the how of the community, is a question we often get at this time is, in short, where to actually build that community. Now, if you look at the example I've actually shown you earlier, these examples are actually examples of platforms where the platforms themselves are actually owned by the community rather than owned on social media. And the key reason we see for that today is that while social are actually a great media to interact with customers, they're not the best way to access and leverage their top customers. What we're seeing is having a community of your own in the end is really the only way to reach 100% of your top customers, because it doesn't matter if they're on this social media or that social media, you don't need to pay to actually talk to all of them. Second thing is that it's also the only way to have a 360 vision of who they actually are in your CRM, because as they are on your community, you can actually link that to who they are as customers on your side, but you can also link that to who they are on different social media and not just one. And finally, it's also the only way in the end to gather content that you can then leverage anywhere, because that content belongs to you, it's on your platform, and you can then actually share it directly on social media or actually share it on your website. I'm seeing one question from Wendy around how long it takes to launch a community. A good question. I'm actually going to jump to that in that part. So it's actually a good transition. Short answer is usually a couple months. Okay, so now we've covered the why. Let's look at the how to actually build a brand community. Now, when we look at the how, there's obviously many ways to actually build your brand community, but what we found is that communities that thrive always get 3 key steps right. And it's these 3 key steps that we've actually based our methodology on. So looking at the steps, the first key step that we always look at is what we've called contribution. And contribution is about answering the key question of what will be the goal of your community and how your community will actually contribute to your business. Now, when we look at this question, we usually find there's 2 key best practices, which I'm going to detail in the next part. First best practice is build a community with a clear business goal. And the second best practice is focus on getting your 1% to impact the 99%. May seem a bit cryptic at this stage, but I'll explain it later. So first part, building a community with a clear business goal. Now, a common mistake that we see when brands are building their communities is they actually build a community that doesn't have a very clear-cut purpose and a purpose that serves both their business and their users. And what they usually go for is they're going to create a community that's going to have the form of a forum or some kind of chat between users, where what's expected of the users is really to chat and simply talk to each other about the brand and its products. And this usually has 2 negative consequences. The first one is it's hard to drive engagement because users don't know what they're supposed to do. They arrive on this platform and basically they can say anything, they can ask anything, they're supposed to talk about products, but they don't have a clear mission. So it's hard to actually create engagement from the start. Second problem is that these are platforms that are very hard to leverage to prove return on investments. Because in the end, even if your platform does work really well, and we've had quite a few examples of big brands or big retailers who have spent a couple of years creating this big forum or a platform, and at the end of the day, they still have a lot of trouble proving that this forum is actually generating return on investment. These guys on the forum are talking about their brand, but they're also talking about other brands. And in the end, the only one that are being impacted by what's happening is the guys within that forum. So oftentimes, what they're looking for after having this experience is finding a way to create a community that will give them a direct way to measure return on investment. Now, if you look at every thriving community, you'll actually see that they have a clear purpose. So to give you a few more concrete examples, Let's look at, for instance, Lego and Glossier. So Lego and Glossiers are communities whose sole key purpose is co-creation. So they are built around the idea that the community will help the brand create the best possible products and will help that way all other customers to actually end up benefiting from the best possible products. If you look at communities like Monkey, Mac, or Superdrug, whether it's creating looks, whether it's writing reviews or posting pictures, the key thing that the community is trying to do is create content. And that content is supposed to inspire shoppers, drive visibility on socials, and so its success is measurable. Last example, Space NK, for instance, actually uses their community to help e-commerce shoppers. So it's really like a live Q&A community, but instead of being a forum, it's actually the community answering questions from shoppers on the website. So we're able to track what the conversion rate is and how many sales the community is helping the business make. So that's the key idea here, having a clear purpose, and having a clear purpose that is aligned with the business and the needs of the users is the best practice, or at least the easier way to create an engaged community that will last a long time because it actually drives revenue. The second key rule is what we call the 1% rule. So the 1% rule is actually a rule within community building, which doesn't only apply to brands, but also applies to many different sectors. And if you look at Facebook, for instance, if you look at Twitter, Instagram, what they found is that most of their social network actually revolves on 1% of their visitors being active and creating the content that then feeds the 99%. When you're creating a brand exception, there is no brand community, there is no really exception. What you're seeing is most of your customers will not necessarily want to interact with you. So basically, they actually want to buy, but they don't want to join your community. They don't actually want to, don't have the time to actually participate. And if you end up chasing getting 10, 20, 30% of your customers, you're going to waste a lot of time. Whereas what you should focus on is actually finding the best way to get your 1% to impact the 99%, meaning finding those guys that do want to engage with you and making sure that these customers actually are creating value. And if you look back on the 6 successful examples that I've been showing you up there, it's actually always the same use case. If it's co-creation, Lego, Glossier are actually using their 1% to come up with the next best possible products that the 99% will then potentially enjoy. If you look at content creation communities, the 1% of those quality content creators that they're recruiting within their community are publishing content that will be visible by everyone, either on product pages or on socials. If you finally look at the community chat, same logic here. The 1% are actually answering the questions of hundreds or thousands of shoppers on the e-commerce website and helping these guys convert. So one key thing here to remind yourself of is don't necessarily go for the 10%, find the 1% and find the way for you that the 1% can create the most value. So that's it for the contribution part, which now takes us to the second part, which is acquisition. So let's say you found the key contribution for your brand, you found the best way for your community to create value. The next question we usually ask our clients to ask themselves is, how do we get users to actually join the community? How do we get people to discover the community? And I think when we are talking about that, there is really 2 key things to do. The first one is create automatic recruitment channels to drive traffic to your platform. And the second one is boost recruitment with frequent campaigns. Basically, all that you're trying to avoid with those 2 techniques is creating a ghost town. And the number one mistake across all communities that we always see is brands actually focusing a lot on building the best possible community with the most features and the prettiest design, without actually taking the time to think and build the way that people are going to find their communities. And so what you end up with is a community that is beautiful, but where there is no one around. So to change that or to work on that, these are the 2 best practices. So first one, creating automatic recruitment to your channels. Here, what we found is what you want to do is basically piggyback your existing sources of traffic to continuously be recruiting your ambassadors. So to give you some very concrete example or best practices, having a tab in the menu of your website that links directly to the community is one way that you will naturally drive traffic to it. If you're leveraging your community to create content on product pages, whether it's reviews, pictures, routines, outfits, anything like that, adding a call to action with this content that basically says, hey, like this outfits or like these pictures, join the community and create or build your own and win points. These are the kind of CTAs or call to actions on the website that will constantly naturally drive traffic directly to the platform. Now, to give you a concrete example, on the left, you should be able to see a graph of what an acquisition graph from one of our communities. And that part you see in yellow is basically the kind of traffic that we get from always on call to actions. Now, compared to the two peaks that you see on the side, and that we'll cover just a bit later, it doesn't look that impressive. But the beauty of it is that it's effortless. And when you add those month after month and year after year, you end up having 40 or 50% of your community, which will have been recruited through those automatic channels. So that's for automatic recruitment. The second key aspect is what we call manual recruitment. Now, manual recruitment is the two spikes that you see on the graphs. These are actually what we call campaigns. They're super powerful, as you can see, but they require more effort. So you have to be very smart about the way you do things. Temptation here for clients when they do recruitment campaigns, it's to use their emails and potentially send an email to their whole CRM saying, hey guys, we've actually just launched our community. That's good, it's better than nothing. But in our experience, best practice here is not to present the community, but rather create some kind of animation within the community. It could be, I'll go into the details, it could be a product test, it could be a contest, but actually push that animation, that activity forward, because it's going to be more attractive and it's going to give concrete examples of what the community is about. So if I were to give you some best practices with beauty brands, I think what works best is, in my experience, is product testing. So inviting users to participate in a product testing that they can only do on the platform. When it comes to fashion, I would say the best one, if it's a feature that you have in your community or that you want to develop, is creating looks or outfits. So allowing users to play with your catalog and create their outfits. It's very easy for them to do, and it's very fun. And it's a great way to recruit a lot of users at the same time. Finally, if you're more of a technical or DIY type company, one great thing is to create user projects and get users to share their projects, whether it's just pictures of their projects or tutorials of how they've done that specific project, is also a great way to get content and get those guys to arrive and discover in the community. Now, when you look at these spikes, obviously not all the participants in the contest will become hardcore fans or ambassadors. But what we do find is that the ones that don't will usually come back for every contest. And so you'll start creating that emotional relationship with the brand. And out of these guys, you will find some of your 1%, which will be basically giving life to the community on a daily basis. So that's it for recruitment and acquisition. Last part of building a community platform for us is what we call retention. So that's an easy one. You've done all you can to create a community that contributes to your business. You've actually had a acquisition strategy that makes it so that dozens or hundreds of people join your community every day. Next question you should ask yourself is, all right, but how do I get those users to actually stay on my community? And here we've basically found two best practices. To us, the best way to actually retain these guys is to combine a scalable reward system that basically showcases and motivates your best contributors with a social interaction system that we're going to put at the heart of the community. So I'll detail those two. Just one quick word on social interactions. What we mean is actually users talking to each other. But first, let's start with the scalable reward system. So when it comes to the reward system for contributors, we found the best system usually combines three things. First thing is social recognition. Now, social recognition is a form of reward where the way that the user will be rewarded is by the recognition of their peers. So that recognition will often be given to a system of likes, thank yous, kudos, points. On Facebook, it's likes. On Twitter, it's retweets. You can have whatever you want in your community. But what really matters is that whenever a user contributes in a positive way, you give the opportunity to other users to give them points and to show to the rest of the community that they've been helpful. So that's really important, because in the end, that's what your community is going to be about. Your 1%, the people that stay, will always be there because they like your brand and they want to feel useful. To that, we add a second system, which is basically what we call tangible rewards. So these are real rewards that you get when usually you reach a certain status or a certain number of points on the community. Examples would be discounts, freebies, free shipping, those kind of rewards. Now, they do add a transactional side to the community, but in our experience, they're actually one of the very best ways to scale a community. If you just stick to social recognition, you usually get dozens, couple hundreds of users, which will help you run your community. But the second you want to reach those 1, 2, potentially 3% and get as many people in your community, the fact of adding a bit of rewards here and there will make it a lot easier for people to understand why they're in the community and to onboard users within the community. And last part is contests. So contests are basically animation. So punctual rewards that actually serve for acquisition. And the key idea here is you don't have to do it every day, maybe once a month, but having a contest that is linked to the what you're doing as a brand at that specific moment, having an event, having a way for users to win a great prize once in a while, if they actually contribute in the best way, is great, both for acquisition, but also to get people coming back and rediscovering the platform. So all in all, of course, the mix of these three will depend on the brands that we work with. And I'm sure brands that work by themselves actually have their own strategy on that. But if you manage to actually combine those three, usually you've got a great combination to actually retain your users. So that's for the reward system. Next part is more around the social interactions. So one thing we've seen, and we've seen that in dozen communities we've created, whether it was just on chat or larger community platforms, is that one of the key drivers of retention and stickiness, so people coming back to the platform, is human interactions. And in fact, a common point that we found between every super user of every platform we've created is that, or at least the vast majority of them, actually have made a lot of friends on the platform. And one of the reasons they keep coming back is to talk to these guys on a daily basis. So the elements we always advise people to have within their community platforms is, one, groups. So groups, you can see them as kind of like forums or feed. It's a bit more modern than forums, but the idea is the same. And these are going to be thematic. So any brand will decide what kind of groups they want to create. Good example, when we're talking about a beauty brand, is they're going to create groups based on concern. So groups for people that have oily skin, groups for people that have dry skin, because we found these are groups that people love to interact on and give each other tips. But it could also be groups linked to a location, links to people that are in the same shop, and that group could be handled, for instance, by the shop staff. There's a lot of possibilities, and we're still testing out a lot of things. But what's really important here is if you have groups and your groups are well built, you'll get users to talk to one another, and users who talk to one another will be users that stick around. Second key element when it comes to social interactions that we've actually launched a couple of months ago is events and live sessions. So one thing we now add to every platform when our customer agrees with it is events. And here the idea is for the brand to be able to create master classes, for the brand to be able to create live shopping sessions, or even we've got some brands that create events that have nothing to do directly with their brands, but that correspond to their values. So we've got beauty brands that are hosting yoga sessions or nutrition sessions with a specialist. It doesn't really matter. The whole idea is being in line with your values and finding ways to actually engage your customers. So that's it for the retention side. The last part I wanted to cover is actually more about the concrete way in which you'll launch a community internally. So one thing we found about community projects is, like other projects. They're actually a long-term project that actually impacts multiple teams within a company. And as most of you have potentially experienced, when you've got projects like that, you need a very specific project and process for that to actually work out. On our side, when it comes to community, we've actually identified 4 key best practices in this domain. So the first one is validating your community potential. If it's just for yourself, we'd advise doing it, but also because once you've actually done it and validating that potential, it'll be very important to champion the project internally. So what you're going to try to do is find some concrete proofs that your brand or your website actually has these ambassador type customers. And best practice here will usually be to look on socials, try and spot the ones, if there are users that keep tagging the brand, users that are participating in your Facebook page or answering other user questions. And the last part also on that is that we've got actually a bunch of users, of clients who go beyond, and whenever they want to launch their community, they actually start out with a survey. So they send a survey to their customer base, talk to them about the idea of creating a community, and by getting these answers, they're able to see what their community would look like. And to us, that's a best practice if you actually have the time to do that. It's great for you, but again, having those results and that customer voice will speed up the development, or at least the convincing of people within the organization about launching this community platform. Second one, and I think that'd be the most important one for me, is linking community to short-term business goals. Now, one of the key fates that we see of many great community projects is that they get infinitely pushed back. Now, everyone thinks it's a great idea, but it's never really the right timing to launch the community. And what we find is the main reason for that is that when a brand is trying to build their community, they have trouble creating a business case, which actually to some extent will answer your question, Frank, that I've seen in the chat. One thing that we always try to do with brands when they're launching their communities is by focusing on contribution and how the community will actually create value. That actually allows those project owners to start thinking and projecting the revenue that will be created by the community and actually having a return on investment in the business case associated with the community project. And what we find is having that business case really helps taking the project across the line. Third point is involving the right teams. So when it comes to involving the right teams, well, to give you a very concrete example, let's say you're launching a community platform tomorrow, and you need to launch, you need to make your community visible. Well, the first thing you're going to need is space on your social network and your newsletter. So you'll need the marketing and socials team to help you out. Next, let's say that the key way that you want to drive conversion through the community is to create content on product pages. Well, if you need the community to do that, you're going to have e-com agree that it's a good idea. And so you're going to have to put the e-com team within the project. Finally, and obviously, if you want to integrate a community platform, there's a bit of work to do on the tech side. And so you need the tech team to be on your side. And the one thing we found whenever we've launched a community is that the earlier you get these teams onboarded on the project, the quicker everything moves after that. Especially the first communities we created where we would, for instance, just work with marketing, we would then have a great idea around the community content that we would show directly on our product page. And it would take us 3, 4, 5, 6 months to actually convince e-commerce to add that content. Also simply because it was not their project and they hadn't been put in the loop. So what we usually do if when we're accompanying clients in their community is we insist on getting these guys as early as the first pitches of the community so that they understand what's at stake and they see how community can benefit them. Final aspect, which is key when setting your community internally, is having the right resources. Now, one thing that usually scares a lot of brands about the community project is how much time and energy it will take them when it actually gets into run phase. And the truth is, if you actually build your community intelligently, there is actually a lot that you can automate within the community. That said, you will, in our experience, always need at least one project manager that is available 6 hours a week. Now, what we often find is we launch a POC of the community that's going to last 6 months to 12 months. We're going to have a project manager handling the community 6 hours a week. And when the project is actually validated and we move past the POC phase, the brand sees the interest of the community, and then they hire someone half-time or sometimes full-time. But if you want to start off, do a proof of concept, 6 hours a week will be the minimum you need. And the second thing that's super important is having a senior stakeholder to champion the project. The higher, the better. Because whenever you're going to run into one of those situations where you need the community to be more visible, you need to launch this or that contest or add that widget on the website, you're going to need someone that you can go to and that will basically liaise with the other teams so that the project keeps being pushed forward. So for us, these are the two key resources that you're going to need whatever happens. So that's it for best practices, and that's basically it for the webinar itself. As you probably feel right now, this has been a lot of very dense information, and that was the goal of the webinar, basically telling you everything we've learned in the last year. Now, obviously, I will send you, as Hannah said in the chat, we'll send you the video, we'll send you the presentation so you can look back at this. And in general, if any of you actually have a community project that they're actually looking to build, or if there's something that's unclear and you want to talk about the specific situation you're in, we're always happy to do what we call workshops. So usually 45 to one hour calls where we try and understand what your project is, and we give you advice on how we would go about building that project. So that's it. I'll now turn to you guys and ask you if you have any questions. I'll start with Frank's question that I can see here. So is there a good methodology to calculate the conversion or financial benefit brought by some community activities? So yep, that methodology will depend on what your contribution or the contribution you define for your community is. We actually have, we can send it to you after that, but we've built our own kind of like ROI calculator to help you understand how your community is creating value. But usually that's going to change, that's going to depend on the activity. So let's say the key thing that your community is doing is creating outfits directly on product pages of your website. Then the first thing we'll do is A/B test those outfits. And through that A/B test, we'll see how much that community content is bringing in terms of revenue on your website. Same kind of logic we'd have with reviews. If your community is answering chat questions, then what we'd be looking at is what's the conversion rate of people that get answers from the community, and what's the revenue created by that. A last example, we've got more and more communities which are also linked to what we call social commerce. So within your community, what we're going to try to find is those users that have a certain reach on socials, so nano or micro influencers, and we're going to work with these guys on campaigns to create content on their socials, and oftentimes with that content we'll associate discount codes, for instance, and that will be the best way for us to track exactly how much customers your ambassadors are actually getting to come to your website. So there's no perfect answer, because in the end it depends on the activities, but these would be like some good examples. And then overall for any community, obviously what we'll be looking at is for anyone that participates in the community, what is their LTV, how has community impacted their LTV, and also more generally what their conversion rate is on the website. So that's a rather long answer. I see another question from Wendy. When would you say is the best time to include the platform providers? Do your clients work with an agency here or community consultants? Now, of course, as a community platform provider, my easy answer would be to say as soon as possible. But really, I think it's linked to the way we work at TokyWoky. When we launched the project at the beginning, we thought we would be a SaaS provider. So we would basically just drop our solution and we'd let our customers handle it. What we've actually found long-term is that we've actually developed a whole expertise about what really works on a community. And if we don't share that with our customers, they can't really exploit the full potential of the platform. So today at TokyWoky, at least, we actually provide both the license and the support and the expertise. But if you don't have that, or if you're actually building a solution with a solution provider that only offers the solution, I would advise getting an agency or community consultants quite quickly in, because they're going to help you take the very important decisions right from the start. Okay. Any other questions? Seeing a chat from Frank. Appreciate that. Just looking for something that can be done before we start the A/B testing. Well, I think looking at Hannah's calculator will probably be a good bet for you, as that specific calculator will allow you, based on some of the metrics. So you'll see the way it works is you're going to enter some metrics about your website, your customers. You're going to be able to say, well, I predict that I will be doing this community and this community. And then this will give you out, based on our use cases, what would be the ideal kind of metrics that you would find. I think if you want to dig deeper into that, we might be able to do we might want to do a call with you to understand which activities you go for, but I think that would be a great starting place. So we've got another question. You're welcome. Do you have any specific metrics to share on the impact of building a community, for example, impact on LTV? So super tricky question, because the easy answer for me to tell you is, on average, we've looked at all our communities, and community members actually have an LTV that is somewhere between 50% to 300% higher than normal customers, which is, of course, theoretically a great news. The problem with that metric is the same as any metric that you would get from a loyalty program, is that chances are the people that are within your community platform are also some of your best customers. So by definition, they already had a high retention rate and they already had a high conversion rate. So it's always kind of tricky to identify clearly what is the impact on the LTV that was done by the community, or what was the impact that was already for these guys. So what we try to do is we work with cohorts. We look at clients that have the same kind of behavior that are not in the community, and we compare that. So this would give you an idea. And of course, we always focus on the fact that anyone that is on the community must have better metrics on that side than what we do. But so a quick answer, if we really want to look into that, it's on a case-by-case basis with every brand. And again, here we're focusing on only the people within the community. But if you really want to leverage your community, of course, LTV of these guys is important. But the key question is also, how do you create content with these guys that impacts everyone else? Additional question from Sophie. Do you have any examples of community projects that has been done? So we have a bunch of examples. I think in general for that, a good practice is for us to do a dedicated call so we can find some of the best examples. But if I move back to one of the slides, I don't know if I can do that easily. Yep, I can. These are some of the good projects that we've seen. You can see them on this slide. You can come and check them out or ask us on a separate email. We can give you some information on the ones that we can go into details about. But yeah, I think if you're thinking about co-creation, Lego and Glossier are some of your go-to use cases. If you're talking about UGC, Monkey, Superdrug, any cosmetic website, really a lot of them now are launching their communities around test and review. And if you're looking for a community chat, I think looking at what Space & K is doing is a good example. Okay, all good. I'm not seeing for now any other question. So I'd like to thank you all for the time you've taken out of your schedule to talk with us today. Don't hesitate if you have any other questions. If you want to work on a workshop, send an email our way, and we'll be happy to have a small call or a workshop with you guys to discuss things. Thanks a lot.